Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
In Ladakh, as we know, local de-escalation is going on. Local de-escalation means that both sides have agreed to go back about 1.5 kilometers from where the two sides earlier used to meet. In the sense that where the two sides earlier used to stop each other, which means their perception of the LAC. And that is to separate the boys so a fight doesn't break out again. No territory has been conceded by any side to anybody. No territory has been gained by any side to anybody. This is in what is called as patrolling point. Patrolling, P-A-T-R-O-L-L-I-N-G. Patrolling point 14, 15, 17, 17A, those areas. Problem remains in what is called as the Fingers area in Pangong Tso, and that is a work in progress. Depsang area, which is up north, generally facing the Daulat Beg Goldi sector, there is no particular discussion because the presumption seems to be that the problem there is more local and that will be sorted if the others get sorted. I don't know. We need to know more about what's happening there. So that is the situation on the ground. At the same time, the Chinese haven't moved their heavy forces back. They had come right up to LOC in a couple of places, a few hundred yards inside. They have now gone back from it, but they are not far away. So a lot of the heavy stuff they brought in: tanks, artillery guns, armored personnel carriers, rocket launchers, radars, jamming equipment. It's all there. And they could increase those forces at a very short notice because infrastructure is much better on that side. And also the terrain is very different on that side. That side is the plateau. Indian side is this side of the watershed. So we are in the mountains. Also, for us to get stuff from the plains into Ladakh is much tougher than it is for the Chinese, given the fact that they have railways running into Tibet. And from there, very good flat roads in much more hospitable terrain. So the larger problem remains. Larger problem also remains in some pockets of the eastern sector where the Chinese are still looking like they are either building up or probing or might give India trouble in the days to come because they had come with a political purpose. Obviously, they will not go back on that political purpose soon. So generally, we should be prepared for a long haul along the frontier. If not in this place, then some other place. This will carry on. So while this carries on, these remain tactical issues, as we keep saying again and again. A few hundred yards this side or a few hundred yards that side is not the nub of the issue. The nub of the issue is that since 1962, India and China have never demarcated either their line of control or line of actual control or their borders, except in the area of Sikkim, where the borders are more or less established, although Chinese are now breaking that rule also in Nakula, but other areas that has not been done. Also, there have been many talks at various points of time between China and India on a package deal border settlement. One of those tragedies of history that when China is ready, India isn't ready. When India is ready, China isn't ready, or when one is ready, the other's offering something which is unreasonable. So let's try and explain what's been going on. And you remember that Airtel commercial that came out a few years back, Jo tera hai wo mera hai, jo mera hai wo tera. So let me use that commercial to explain what's been going on between China and India. So initially the proposal that came from Zhou Enlai when he came to India in 1960, that was Jo tera hai wo tera hai, jo mera hai wo mera, which means what I have, I keep, what you have, you keep. So he said that if you accept the reality of Aksai Chin, then we might accept the reality of NEFA or the eastern sector, which means he was effectively offering you a swap that both sides keep what they have. We've got Aksai Chin, we keep it. You have NEFA, which later became Arunachal Pradesh, you keep it. Was Nehru open to it? If you see a lot of the documentary evidence, you see lots of books that have been written about that period, it does look like he was inclined, but he faced a very strong opposition within his cabinet. Of course, he had his own innovations to it. Between him and Krishna Menon, they thought they could offer the Chinese a lease deal in Aksai Chin. whereby to say that Aksai Chin India has its sovereignty, but it's leasing to China in perpetuity or something like that. Chinese didn't accept that. So in fact, Nehru was keen that Zhou Enlai should understand that he had compulsions, his cabinet wasn't listening to him. So he sent Zhou Enlai to meet his key cabinet colleagues, including Morarji Desai, Govind Ballabh Pant, who were then finance and home ministers, and also Dr. Radhakrishnan, who was vice president. All of them lectured Zhou Enlai. I've spoken about this in the past, and told him that he was being unreasonable. So Zhou Enlai actually went back to China thinking or believing that he had been humiliated. Now, he might have thought that he was being deliberately humiliated. On the other hand, Nehru's motive, all documentary evidence shows you, was to try and get consensus from his cabinet, but also to convince Zhou Enlai that he had genuine opposition in his cabinet. Now, people who were opposing Nehru on this were not just doing it because they were territorial ultra-nationalists. They were also doing it because they didn't like Nehru and they wanted to show Nehru and Krishna Menon down. So it got caught in that politics, and that deal, then the war happened, that deal went out of the window. And then many ideas kept coming up from both sides, but not officially. Somebody said, all right, if the Chinese have such an issue about Tawang, then there can be an exchange not of territory, but if Chinese allow Indian pilgrims easy access to Kailash Mansarovar, India could also allow people of Tibetan origin easy access to Tawang, because the Chinese claim was that in the past, until 1948-49, Tawang was administered by the Tibetan administration, or they at least collected taxes from it. But this was all airy-fairy stuff. It did not go anywhere. Then in 1980-81, the Chinese made a fresh beginning, and that was made by Deng Xiaoping. Again, documented facts. So he spoke with G. Parthasarathy, who was Indira Gandhi's advisor on foreign affairs, a bit like what today's NSA might be. and Deng Xiaoping gave an interview to an Indian defense publication called Vikrant, in which he offered again a package deal. And this package deal again was on the same pattern, jo tera hai, wo tera hai, jo mera hai, wo mera. So Mrs. Gandhi, again you can see documentary evidence that she did take it seriously and she did explore it. But she also ran into opposition from within her own system. Besides other things, there were constitutional issues, that can a government in India give away its territory, or what is considered to be its territory. Also, there was a resolution, unanimous resolution of Parliament saying that India has to recover all the territory that's with China. So she was also chastened. There was a famous or infamous Berubari incident. Berubari was an enclave over which Pakistan and India, remember, this is still late 50s. So what is Bangladesh today was East Pakistan. Both countries had a dispute. So Nehru and his counterpart agreed that Berubari will be divided. When that happened, questions came up in Parliament and elsewhere that could he use Article 3 of the Constitution to give away what is seen as Indian territory. So Nehru's government made a reference to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court said you can make adjustments, but you cannot cede territory. And if you cede territory, then you have to go to Parliament and pass a constitutional amendment. So that's how the 9th constitutional amendment in India came in. Nehru had it passed, and that's how Berubari was settled. Mrs. Gandhi was conscious of it. So she had those issues examined, but frankly, there was insufficient support, because in her system also, there were too many people who were senior people who were still carrying scars of 1962. Once that moment was lost, then trouble in Punjab started, other issues started, Sanjay Gandhi died, many things happened, and Mrs. Gandhi's government went into another direction. Something similar again came up when Rajiv Gandhi went to China in 1988. And again, a lot of the historians or watchers of that period, contemporary historians, would tell you that if Rajiv Gandhi had come back to power, he would have thought of revisiting it. Once again, that didn't happen, and then India had unstable governments. Then Vajpayee came in and he picked up the thread, and once again movement was made in some such areas. And that is when in 2003 India accepted the One China policy, and China in principle accepted Sikkim as a part of India. We keep talking about this often. So that was one substantive gain between the two sides in that period of détente or that period of calm. In 2005, something more important happened, because by this time what was happening was that the Chinese had resiled from the earlier position of a package deal, which means you keep what you have, I keep what we have. So now they are saying, जो मेरा है वो मेरा है, पर जो तेरा है उसमें से थोड़ा सा मेरा है. And what was the thoda sa mera? That was what they call as the district of Tawang. And their argument was that, look, Tawang was never your side of the watershed, that McMahon line, although we don't agree with McMahon line, but even if you go by McMahon line, it was drawn with a thick nib ink pen. So if you translate that into today's satellite imagery, the thickness of that ink, of that nib would be about 7 kilometers. So you can't just go by that. Tawang is the other side of that high watershed, and also until 1949-50, Tibetan administration used to collect taxes in Tawang. Also, what they don't say is that 6th Dalai Lama was born in Tawang. So they want Tawang as Tibetan territory. Obviously, such a thing was never going to fly in India. So the Chinese shifted their position. So in 2005, when Manmohan Singh and Wen Jiabao met his Chinese counterpart, then they signed up, and this is a document which can be read and verified by all of us. They signed what was called as the Guiding Principles and Political Parameters for Boundary Settlement. In that, there were two important elements, which is that both sides will have respect for settled geographical features and for settled populations. Now, the Chinese never said that they were giving up their claim on Tawang, but this could be interpreted to mean that the Chinese meant in 2005 that there could be a settlement whereby they dropped their claim on Tawang. That is something the Chinese never specified, they've never stuck to it, and now, because they never specified it, they don't even need to go back on it. But the understanding now is that that deal is off the table. China now thinks that they are much stronger than India. They don't see the need for a settlement, for so much give and take. So once again, what was initially जो मेरा है वो मेरा है, जो तेरा है वो तेरा है, it then became जो मेरा है वो मेरा है, जो तेरा है वो थोड़ा सा मेरा है. It's now beginning to again sound like जो मेरा है वो मेरा है, जो तेरा है वो भी मेरा है. So this is now, it looks like the Chinese have gone to their maximalist position. Constitutionally, India is also bound to pursue its constitutionalist position, its maximalist position, which is the constitutional position, which means all of Aksai Chin must be recovered. There were also thoughts in the middle as the two sides talked, particularly in early 80s, that maybe India would say, there were thoughts on the Indian side that okay, they can keep the rest of Aksai Chin in exchange for accepting India's sovereignty over Arunachal Pradesh if they return the fruits of occupation and fruits of war. Those fruits of war are about 2,500 square kilometers that the Chinese occupied in Ladakh in 1962 but did not vacate. Whatever they occupied in Arunachal in 1962, they vacated. Out of what they occupied in Ladakh, about 2,500 square kilometers, they did not vacate. So the idea was the Chinese would return that. In the middle, there was also a talk at one point. In fact, Krishna Menon came up with the idea that okay, very early on, that even if the Chinese want to make this trade-off between East and the West, then the Chinese should give us something more. And that something then would have been Chumbi Valley, which is like a dagger into India's neck and which into India's Siliguri neck for simplicity. But obviously that didn't fly because nobody was ready for a larger boundary settlement. So that is where we stand right now. Now, who has overplayed his hand? Who has underplayed his hand? History will tell us, and also as time passes, we'll get to know, because history now is not tens of years. History is now counted in days and weeks and months. So more and more will come out. But it could be that even Xi Jinping lost his opportunity, because if you want a settlement with an Indian leader, you should do it in the early days of that leader. And similarly, if an Indian leader wants to settle his long-term problems that he's inherited from history, all the baggage, then that has to be done early on in one's tenure. So it does look like that moment has been lost, and India and China are now back several decades to the level of hostility and suspicion and doubt that they thought they had left behind. Now, before I let you go away, I can't but tell you the story of how Tawang came under Indian control. We talked a lot about Tawang today, and we know it's a bone of contention. That's the prize the Chinese really desperately want. Even in a settlement now, because they think they are much stronger. They will not get it, but they think they are much stronger. That's the reason they've come and made this madcap claim for territory inside Bhutan. Because to get to that territory, they have to take Tawang first and then come inside. It's not going to happen. But if you want to know about Tawang, you have to know about a remarkable character, a fantastic Indian who's mostly forgotten, called Major Bob Khating. Now, Major Bob Khating was a remarkable Manipuri. In fact, he was a Tangkhul Naga from Manipur, from the district of Ukhrul. Since then, the most prominent Tangkhul Naga we know is Mr. Muiwa, who's the leader of the NSCN, the biggest insurgent group. So Bob Khating, his proper Naga name was Ralingnau Khating. So Ralingnau Bob Khating. He joined the British Army. He fought very valiantly. Initially, he was in the 19th Hyderabad Regiment. Then he came to Kumaon Regiment. And then he became a member of the V Force or Victor Force operating in Manipur, performed heroically, got a military cross, also got an MBE. And then the British left. The Maharaja of Manipur asked him to join politics. He left the army. He joined politics. He contested elections. He won elections for the assembly in Manipur, became a minister for tribal districts and also for Manipur Rifles. Manipur Rifles, for clarity, is the name given to the state police forces armed wing. So just as you have Delhi Armed Police or Punjab Armed Police, you have Manipur Rifles. It's not an army regiment. So he became a minister for that as well. While that was going on, in 1950, Assam had its earthquake. All of the northeast was devastated. So he was drafted in to help with it. By this time, he had caught Nehru's eye and other people's eye in Delhi. And then he was appointed assistant political officer in what was then NEFA, Northeast Frontier Agency, which later became Arunachal. Now, Major Khating was no longer in the army, but he was a soldier in the head, also had a borderwala's mindset. So he realized that all of this NEFA territory was hardly governed, that Indian sovereignty was hardly expressed there. So he, in defiance of caution from Delhi and Shillong, where the Assam government was, carried on pushing, established Indian sovereignty all over what is Arunachal today. But most importantly, he took 2 platoons of Assam Rifles, which is a paramilitary force. He took 2 platoons of Assam Rifles and went to Tawang and drove out the odd Tibetan fellow who was collecting taxes there, established Indian control and established India's international boundary there at a place called Bumla. It still exists. So India owes the fact that Tawang is a part of India, and Tawang is a place which is so well settled and happy and so many people visit, is owed to this Naga soldier from Manipur. Now, Bob Khating also got a Padma Shri later from Government of India. So Bob Khating was political officer in NEFA in the 62 war. He was also the chief civilian liaison officer with the 4 Corps, which was fighting that war, unfortunately not very well at that point. He also is somebody whose mind invented the idea of Special Services Bureau, which is today's Sashastra Seema Bal. We spoke about it in our Cut the Clutter on paramilitary forces, and he continued to serve the nation. He became ambassador of India, the first tribal to become ambassador. He was ambassador to what was called Burma then, now Myanmar. Even after that, although he went into retirement, refused to take more jobs from the government, he played a stellar role in the first Shillong Peace Accord between the largest of Naga insurgent groups and Government of India in 1975. When you talk of Tawang, you can't not talk of Bob Khating. And as you talk of Bob Khating, you have to also remember one more institution that was created in that time. So in early 50s, Nehru created something called Indian Frontier Administrative Service, because he thought that in the northeast, particularly in Arunachal, the ordinary ICS officers or Indian bureaucrats were not able to measure up to the tribal expectations. So he wanted to build a special cadre of sensitive officers who will serve in border areas. So he wrote a letter, in fact, to the governor then of Assam, that is Jairam Das Daulatram, on 4th of April 1952. And I've got this from Claude RP's blog. I'll give you a link. Please read that. He's got wonderful stuff on Tibet and India-China history. Nehru writes there, I have indicated previously that officers dealing with tribal people have to be chosen with extreme care. Just as the average Assamese might not be suitable, the average ICS officer is also usually unsuitable. In effect, we have to build some kind of a special cadre. Apart from general policies involved, the approach is to be most sympathetic and friendly. The test of an officer on this service is how far he gains popularity among the tribals. Now, the larger story of IFAS, I will tell you about at some other point. But right now, to say that among the pioneers of that service, the first two to join that service was Major Bob Khating.